My name is Sophie Morrison. I'm 34 years old, and for most of my adult life, my family has filed me under 3 words: computer work. Those words are neat, portable, and profoundly misleading. They compress a decade of systems thinking, client rescues, sleepless product rollouts, and a consulting firm that quietly bills around $800,000 a year into something that sounds like a hobby you can pause mid-sentence. They also explain why, at 1:50 p.m. on a Sunday in late October, as I eased my car into the circular drive of the house my father insists on calling the estate, I already knew I wasn't really invited to a conversation. I was being summoned to a conclusion. The estate is a white colonial with high columns and a lawn groomed into obedient grids, the kind of house that has a posture. Through the front windows, I could see my father pacing in his wood-paneled study, papers fanned across his mahogany desk like exhibits pre-labeled for court. My mother was aligning chairs in the living room in straight, careful rows, her movements as precise as a stage manager's. If you listened carefully, you could hear the house breathe, the soft hum of vents, the crystalline clink of glass settling on glass, the clock's tick that made time feel ironed. Tyler arrived first in a black Range Rover, the kind of car that announces itself even before the driver does. Jessica followed in a silver Mercedes SUV, glossy as a smile that has learned where the cameras are. Doors clicked, coats were smoothed, and faces assumed that curated ease that can be financed. My mother opened the door and hugged me tightly, her eyes flicking just once toward my Tesla before returning to my face. "So glad you could make it," she said, warm and practiced. "We know you're always busy with computer work." Years ago, I would have tried to edit those words, a laptop open on a coffee table, a quick tour of schedules and invoices, the narrative corrected. Today, I only smiled. Some explanations aren't bridges. They're invitations to be misunderstood more precisely. We took our positions like a cast whose marks were taped to the floor. Tyler sprawled in the leather armchair, loose and proprietary, the pose of a man who has rehearsed ownership. Jessica perched on the sofa, back straight, pen poised above a faux leather notebook. Her husband, Brad, held a glass of water as if it might volunteer a solution. The children were escorted upstairs to the playroom because the adults need to talk, which, in my family, has always been code for decisions that have already been made. My father stood near the fireplace, hands clasped behind his back, his favorite posture for announcing things that will sound inevitable by the time he is finished saying them. 3 days earlier, he'd sent a formal email, important family business discussion. The subject line had the dryness of a legal disclaimer. It had also done its work. We were all here, on time, visually compliant with the idea of a family that plans. I took a sip of water and let the second hand speak. I like clocks. They hold secrets without changing expression. "Thank you all for coming," my father began, even his gratitude polished. "Fun. Your mother and I have been doing some estate planning, and we need to discuss family assets." The word estate landed on the coffee table like an embossed seal. My mother made a micro adjustment to a candle, the sort of gesture you make when you want the room to hear that nothing is out of place. Tyler leaned forward a fraction. Jessica's eyes brightened. I waited. People don't say succession until they've already drawn the arrows. He mapped the terrain quickly. This house, Tyler's place on Riverside, Jessica's downtown townhouse, my little condo, the lake cabin, and a handful of rental properties that, in his phrasing, provide passive income. My little condo. I almost laughed. 2,400 square feet of glass and skyline, a penthouse I bought 4 years ago with my money, my work, my sleeplessness, and somehow, in family dialect, it had shrunken to little. Language resizes things. If you let it, little will cut you and apologize while you bleed. Outside, the lawn's lines met at right angles. Even the grass submitted to a grid. I thought about a client in Berlin last quarter and the permissions architecture we'd rebuilt so no executive could optimize shared resources to suit private maps. Families are systems with bylaws written in holidays and habits. Tyler is the man of the house, Jessica, a natural with people, and I'm the one who can work from anywhere. Tell a story often enough, and it becomes furniture. You don't see it until you bruise your shin. We've been thinking, my father continued, opening a folder as if rehearsed, about how to better align these properties with everyone's needs. He made it sound like urban planning, morally neutral and data-driven. My mother nodded at the word align. Optics love that word. The problem with alignment, I've learned, is that it can be a polite synonym for taking. He cleared his throat, and the air sharpened. Tyler, you and Amanda have 4 children. Your current house is too small. You'll be moving into the estate. The sentence slid into the room like a key already cut. 6 bedrooms, plenty of yard, close to good schools. Tyler's mouth curved in gratitude that felt practiced, the gratitude of a man being told that what he wants is also what the group needs. And Jessica, my father said, allowing himself the smallest smile, you and Brad do so much entertaining and networking for your ventures. You'll take Sophie's penthouse downtown. It's better suited to the kind of events you're building. The words Sophie's penthouse arrived softened by the phrase better suited, the way a velvet cloth softens a blow. I set my glass down quietly because I wanted to hear the click of crystal on table. Sometimes the smallest sounds tell you what matters. Jessica's hands came together in an involuntary clap, the reflex of a woman who has been given the venue she didn't know how to ask for. Oh my God, that place is gorgeous, she said, then turned toward me with a smile that asked nothing. You don't mind, right? You're never there anyway, always traveling. My mother's voice floated in, a warm blanket. And Sophie, dear, you can have the apartment above the garage here. It's cozy, and you're always saying you want something low maintenance. Cozy. 600 square feet, designed decades ago for a live-in housekeeper. Words are architects. Cozy can shrink a room before you even measure it. I glanced at my father. So this is a decision, I said evenly, not a discussion. He smiled the kind of smile that makes refusal feel like rudeness. Sometimes, he said, we have to think about the greater good. These properties are family assets. Your grandmother's trust helped with down payments years ago. That makes them, in a sense, family property. There it was, a sentiment that plays well on Facebook, a sentence shaped like a virtue and deployed like a crowbar. I breathed in, slow and steady. In tech, I learned that open systems without boundaries collapse. Families aren't different. We are told that kindness is a hand extended. We are rarely told that boundaries are a roof beam. Without them, the walls don't hold. Before we go further, I said, my voice thin as thread and just as strong, can I ask one question? Tyler's thumbs were already moving, texting, I assumed, an early victory lap. Jessica drew a line under a phrase in her notebook, downtown condo. My mother looked at me with that gentle patience that suggests a child is about to learn something. When you say family property, I asked my father, do you mean the things we like to think are ours, or the things that are actually ours? He frowned slightly, surprised that the script had a margin note. I took out my phone and opened a folder with a star next to its name, a folder I had created months ago when rumor began to trail my mother's soup ladle. Families gossip the way cities hum. Word travels faster than truth. But documents, I've learned, wait. They don't demand to be believed. They will sit in the dark until you turn on the light. By all means, my father said, gracious in victory. Ask your question. We can finish the plan after. I nodded, and a door opened in me that had been stuck for 8 years. I knew exactly what would follow his phrase about better alignment. I also knew that my next words would be the hinge on which this meeting turned, from a ceremony of taking to a record of facts. I looked at my mother, then at my father, and finally at the stack of papers in his hands. We can finish your plan, I said softly. Right after I finish the story you keep telling without the last chapter. The room paused, clock, vents, even the air. Outside, the lawn swallowed a leaf that had dared to fall across a line. Inside, the narrative that had always carried me along like a river, dutiful daughter, flexible schedule, negligible claim, met rock. And in that stillness, you could hear something new begin, the sound a boundary makes when it's finally named. My father didn't notice that my question had shifted the temperature in the room by a full season. He went back to his folder, smoothing the top sheet with the flat of his palm, the way people do when they want paper to serve as proof of fairness. As I was saying, he continued, voice pitched to reasonable, we've been looking at the family's needs and resources and trying to align them. A line is a blank check of a word. It can buy almost anything, especially if you sign it with the phrase greater good. Tyler and Amanda, with 4 kids, he said, glancing at Tyler as if bestowing something earned, will move into the estate. It's logical. 6 bedrooms, outdoor space, room for a proper office. Schools. He nodded once, a gavel made of chin. Tyler nodded back, the choreography perfect. And Jessica, he went on, turning a page that did not need turning, you and Brad will transition into Sophie's penthouse downtown. You're building ventures that require entertaining and networking. That space better suits your trajectory. Trajectory. Another clever word, clean, aerodynamic, resistant to guilt. In our family, business plans have always needed theaters more than models. Jessica is good at theaters. She clapped softly, The instinct of a woman who knows how to accept a gift without appearing to demand it. "It's gorgeous," she said, already editing my home into her mood board. "We can host Thursday salon nights, CEO circles, investor mixers, curated dinners." Her eyes sparkled with the nouns of proximity: investor, CEO, circle. "Sophie travels so much," she added, "to no one and to me. She'll hardly notice." My mother sewed the seam. "And sweetheart, you always say you want simple. There's the apartment above the garage. Cozy, manageable, low maintenance." "Close to us?" She said close to us the way people say close to heaven. The garage apartment was 600 square feet with a view of shingles. In the listing photos from decades ago, a young maid stands in the doorway with her hands folded. Words are soft hammers. After enough taps, a penthouse is little, an outbuilding is cozy, and a transfer of title feels like tidying. I could have laughed, but laughter is a bridge you sometimes can't cross back over. Instead, I asked the kind of questions that sound like curiosity but are really record-keeping. "What happens to the rental properties?" I said, because the rentals were the engines, the parts of the machine that spun even when no one looked. My father was ready. "Those will be divided between Tyler and Jessica to manage," he said, pleased at the appearance of logistics. "They have families. Passive income will help stabilize their households. You're doing fine on your own. You can work from anywhere." He smiled kindly, like a doctor explaining that an amputation is minor because you've got another leg. "Passive income," I repeated softly, tasting the phrase. There is nothing passive about income. I pictured leases negotiated in month-end panic, roofs tarped at midnight, tenants who pay on the 19th and call you at dawn on the 20th, tax assessments that jump like heart rates, the way boilers die in February out of principle. There's a reason good property managers sleep with their phones charged. "And the titles?" I asked, because part of me wanted to see how far the story could bend without snapping. "We're not getting bogged down in legalese," my father said, which was funny because legalese was exactly what he had spread on the table like hors d'oeuvres. "This is family property. Your grandmother's trust helped with down payments years ago. That makes it family." The sentence was a moral costume trying to pass as a statute. He glanced at my mother, who nodded carefully, the choreography again. Small, perfect motions that say nothing has to hurt if you don't name it. Brad found his voice. "We can really make something of the downtown place," he said, talking past me as if the condo were a stage no one owned. Brand dinners, thought leader salons, maybe a monthly founders roundtable. Jessica squeezed his arm like you would a well-trained dog. Tyler cleared his throat. "Managing rentals is work," he said, in the tone of a man generously accepting a burden. But we'll step up." He was already somewhere else, eyes unfocused with the real estate of a different life, a home office facing the lawn, a grill on the patio, a Christmas tree set before the big window for neighbors to admire, the kind of performance domesticity that photographs well. My mother turned to me again, the warmth in her voice braided with expectation. "You'll love being close," she said. "It'll be nice. We can have dinner more often. You're always so busy. It will simplify things. Simplify is one of those words that sounds like mercy and acts like erasure. If you simplify a woman enough, she becomes a schedule. I set my hands in my lap because I wanted to feel the weight of them. So to recap, I said, polite to the point of parody, Tyler moves into the estate, Jessica and Brad move into my penthouse, extended family continues in the rentals but managed by Tyler and Jessica, and I move into the apartment above the garage. My father looked pleased. Exactly, he said, as though I'd solved a math problem whose answer had always been in the back of the book. See? Alignment. When I consult for clients who have inherited systems they don't understand, there's always a slide where I pause. The slide is a flowchart of ownership, control, and responsibility. 3 circles that overlap in dangerous ways when no one can say which is which. In families like ours, ownership is a feeling, control is a habit, and responsibility is a story told about someone else. I stared at my father's folder and thought of that slide. Tyler re-entered the room from the hallway, phone in hand, an apology in his eyes that had nothing to do with me. Amanda's thrilled, he said to my father, more than to the group. We were just saying the school district alone. He stopped at the look on my face. I wasn't angry. Anger is hot and fast. What I felt was colder and more durable, clarity. It settles in your bones and does not ask permission. Sophie, my mother said, reading something in my silence. I know it's a lot to take in, but your father and I have thought about what's best for everyone. The phrase "what's best for everyone" is a summary that leaves out the footnotes. Who pays? Who defers? Who yields? She reached toward my hand and patted it, a sealant over a crack. There is a point in any deposition, the documentary kind and the emotional kind, when the questions stop being questions and become timestamps. When you say family property, I said again, you're saying grandmother's trust contributed to down payments. My father nodded. Correct. And because of that contribution, I continued, you're saying current assets belong to the family to be redistributed as needed. Nods all around. And you've decided the needs are Tyler's 6 bedrooms, Jessica's entertaining venue, my toesiness. My mother flinched at the word, a seam popping under the stress of being seen. My father leaned in, his voice softening as if he were about to explain bedtime to a child. Sometimes individuals have to sacrifice for the greater good, Sophie. Your success gives you flexibility. It's not punishment. It's stewardship. There it was, the hymn. Stewardship. The way our culture disguises extraction in Sunday clothes. In some families, the eldest son inherits. In ours, the most competent daughter donates. I reached for my water. The glass was cool, the condensation ring already, a pale coin on the table. I took a measured sip and set the glass down with care, as if the sound itself mattered. In the quiet that followed, I could hear the upstairs laughter of someone else's children. The sound passed through me and did not stick. You've already made the decisions, I said. It wasn't a question. This meeting is to inform me. My father looked hurt, which surprised me with its sincerity. We wanted your input, he said. We're a family. The word family can mean a shelter or a lever. Today it was a lever. I nodded, as if accepting a weather report. Fearing? Then allow me to offer my input, I said, and the tone of my voice surprised everyone, including me. Calm. Documentary. A narrator stepping into the frame. Since we're aligning, since we're stewarding, since we are, what was it, not getting bogged down in legalese. I tapped my phone, the starred folder opening like a small door. I think we should also look at the papers that define what is ours, what is mine, and what merely lives in the story we've told each other long enough to believe. Jessica blinked, the pen in her hand, suddenly uncertain of where to land. Tyler's thumbs went still. My mother's eyes moved from my face to my phone and back again, a pendulum considering which time to keep. My father exhaled, not yet alarmed. Exactly, but moving toward it by degrees. Sophie, he said gently, let's not turn this into a record? I offered. A record would be good. He closed his folder halfway, as if he could literally reduce the size of his plan. All right, he said. What is it you'd like to add? And there it was. The opening. A sliver wide enough for facts. 8 years waited behind my teeth. The crash. The calls. The signatures. The LLC no one had asked to understand because gifts are easier to accept when you pretend they're not gifts. I sat back and let the room take one more breath of its old story. This won't take long, I said. But it will change the ending. 8 years earlier, the story had a different narrator. It was the bank. It started in a week that smelled like fear, coffee going cold, envelopes arriving with windows, voicemails stacking up at impossible hours. Interest rates had nudged upward, adjustable loans adjusted in the wrong direction. Rents that had been enough suddenly weren't. Roofs decided to leak in sympathy with numbers. If you live long enough inside mortgages and market bulletins, you learn the music of panic. It's the same 3 notes no matter who plays them: over-leveraged, under-collected, overdue. I was 26, fresh off selling my first company, an unglamorous platform. The kind of quiet tech that makes other people's loud tech work. The wire had landed months earlier, a number on a screen with the discrete gravity of a planet. I was still learning how not to stare at it. Then my father called. The voice that used to introduce me to rooms as our little genius was thinner than I'd ever heard it. Sophie, he said. Careful on the consonants. You're good with money. Help us figure this out. Figure this out is a phrase that bends time. Suddenly I was in their kitchen, the one with the backsplash my mother had imported in to tell a story about taste, watching my parents spread out statements until the granite disappeared. There were 4 mortgages. 2 HELOCs, 3 credit cards with balances that read like license plates, a stack of unpaid tax notices with their own particular italics. Tyler's house on Riverside had insurance due and a balloon payment no one had planned for. Jessica's townhouse was mid-renovation, the kind that starts as paint and ends as a wall moved 6 inches to the left to open the space. The lake cabin needed a new furnace before winter. A tenant at one of the rentals had discovered mold, and a lawyer at the same time. The market dipped, my father said, as if the market were the tide and not the weather. It'll come back. It would, eventually. But not fast enough for invoices with due dates that cared nothing for hope. We sat until midnight, I logged in to county portals and pulled property records, because public data will tell you what private pride won't. I made a spreadsheet I never showed anyone that night, a map of everything: purchase prices, current assessed values, liens, interest rates, insurance premiums, the ages of roofs and boilers, and the estimated year each would die if we did nothing. I called 3 bankers I knew from a client project and asked ugly questions with beautiful diction. I learned what I already suspected. My parents had treated appreciation like income, leverage like strategy, and tomorrow like a guarantor. What they had, in other words, was a story with too much plot and not enough cash flow. "Loan us the money," my father suggested finally, the way you might suggest borrowing a coat in a storm. "We'll pay you back as soon as the market corrects." He said it with the sincerity of a man who believes good intentions compound. My mother's hand found his. "It's family," she added, and I understood that she was placing the request under the cloak of virtue, where accounting looks unkind. I could have written a check. It would have been faster in the short term and crueler in the long term. Loans, Jimmy, open the same door twice. And you keep the door frame weak, someone is always tumbling back through. I had spent my early 20s learning how systems collapse, not because of malice, usually, but because no one is willing to say the hinge is broken while the door still closes with a satisfying click. So I didn't write a check. I formed an LLC, Clear View Holdings, a name so boring it could be trusted. I sat with a lawyer who didn't try to impress me, and a CPA who had the personality of a ledger, ideal for someone who would one day explain to me, without adjectives, how the math feels. We built a structure that would hold when sentiment shook. The LLC would purchase each property at an agreed price, documented down to the commas, with escrows that paid off liens and taxes and late fees that had multiplied like rumors. I negotiated with banks who pretended to dislike me until their calculators fell in love. A notary came to the house. My father signed forms that turned ownership into liquidity. My mother initialed pages that admitted the past had been a gamble. Tyler and Jessica, who had not attended this particular meeting because the kids have soccer, were informed by text that everything was handled. The signatures were real. I keep them digitized and backed up twice because you don't tempt fire and you don't tempt memory. On a Tuesday in late November, wires moved, liens cleared, and the foreclosure clock stopped. A county clerk stamped a deed with a sound like a gavel underwater. Clear View Holdings LLC, the most forgettable phrase in the room, went on every title. I walked outside into air that smelled like cold metal and stood for a long time in the dark. Relief is not euphoria. It is a subtraction. You know it by the space it leaves. I didn't tell anyone more than they needed to know. Not because I wanted to hide, but because transparency, in families like ours, is often repurposed into entitlement. I had no interest in starring as the benefactor daughter, a character adored at brunch and resented in private. I paid the insurance premiums when they came due. I set calendar reminders for property taxes and watched them blink green twice a year. When a boiler failed at the worst possible moment, February, of course, I approved the invoice in 4 minutes and later told my mother that the downstairs smells better. When hail bullied the estate roof, I reviewed 3 bids and chose the quietest competent roofer, a man who sent estimates in PDFs named something other than Final 3. PDF. I tracked every maintenance ticket, not because I'm a martyr, but because data is the only gossip I trust. I told myself I would reveal the structure when revealing it wouldn't be turned into a weapon. Then time did its confident trick. It passed. Birthdays clicked by. Holidays performed themselves. I learned the art of the strategic nod. Computer work, they'd say, and I'd agree, because no one fights over a fog. Now, in my parents' living room, I opened the starred folder on my phone and slid the device across the table. On the screen, a neat index. Deed, estate transfer, 2017. Died, Riverside transfer, 2017. Deed, townhouse transfer, 2017. Deed, lake cabin, 2017. Rental 1 through rental 6 transfers. Tax receipts 2017 through 2024. Insurance certificates. Maintenance ledger. There is a particular stillness that enters a room when paper starts speaking. My father glanced down, glanced up, glanced down again. He tapped one file. The PDF unfurled, black text on white, a chain of legal nouns concluding in his signature. He scrolled. Another signature. Another. The flush climbed his neck as if the truth were heat. You forged, he began, then stopped, because the date stamps did not blink and the notary's seal does not blush. He moved to the next deed, then the next, and with each page the house seemed to lower itself toward earth, losing a centimeter of pretense. I didn't loan you money, I said, my voice as plain as the font. I bought everything, this house, Tyler's house, Jessica's townhouse, the lake cabin, and the rentals through Clear View Holdings. I paid off every debt tied to them. I have paid the taxes, the insurance, and the repairs for 8 years. You have been living in properties you do not own. Jessica made a sound I had only heard from her once, the day a jeweler told her the sapphire she'd loved was lab-grown, a small gasp of misalignment between story and stone. That's not possible, she said, reaching for a word that could hold her. My name, our names, are not on the deeds, I said gently. You can check the county website. Or we can keep scrolling. Tyler stood without standing, his body deciding before his mind. Even if, he started, then found no clause to tie the sentence to. Brad stared at the floor, suddenly fluent in silence. My mother, to her credit, didn't accuse. She looked at me the way you look at a photograph you don't remember posing for. Why didn't you tell us? She asked, and there was hurt there, the proper kind, the kind that admits itself. I took a breath. Because the moment you knew I had money, I said, it would become family money. My success would become communal property by story, if not by law. I wanted the law to be clear. Family property, my father repeated, as if the incantation could still perform its trick. I nodded toward the phone. Those documents are the part of the story the incantation can't change. The room redistributed itself into smaller pieces, breath, heartbeats, the weight of a glass in a hand. Outside, somewhere, a leaf blower insisted on reshaping the ground. Inside, We were done with euphemisms. We had entered the minutes. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. For 8 years, I said, I've been generous in ways that can be counted. Today, I will be generous in a different way. I will tell the truth plainly. I slid one more file into view, a summary ledger that listed, by address, every tax payment, insurance premium, repair, and major capital expense. Numbers are a form of mercy. They release you from the magic tricks of language. My father's hand hovered over the phone and then withdrew. He closed his folder halfway, then all the way, as if conceding that paper only matters when it matches the facts. The narrative he had planned, succession, alignment, greater good, sat beside him, suddenly smaller. In its place was a new sentence that had waited 8 years to be spoken aloud. You live, I said, looking at each of them in turn, in my houses. There's a certain hush that follows the sentence you can't take back. My father stared at the deeds on my phone, as if they were a foreign alphabet he should have learned as a child. Jessica blinked, recalibrating her posture around an absence where ownership used to sit. Tyler looked at the fireplace, probably because it was safer than looking at me. I let the silence find its shape. Then I did the least dramatic thing I could think of. I opened one more folder. Before you finalize your redistribution, I said, I need to finalize mine. On the screen, a set of documents arranged themselves as neatly as table settings. Notice to quit, the estate. Notice to quit, Riverside. Notice to quit, downtown townhouse. Notice to quit, lake cabin. Notices for 3 rentals currently housing extended family. Aunt Maureen's place with the perennial, broken screen she never reported. Uncle Frank's one bed where the mail piled up. The cousin who promised he was between gigs for the 5th year running. 30 days to vacate for all occupants without valid lease agreements. Delivered pursuant to statute. Drafted in language so plain even feelings could read it. My father made a sound somewhere between a scoff and a plea. You wouldn't, he said, and it was not a question. You can't evict family. My mother's hand found his forearm. Her eyes, when they met mine, were complicated. Sophie, she said quietly, please. Jessica exhaled a laugh that had no humor in it. This is absurd. You'd toss your parents on the street to make a point. Tyler chose anger as a flotation device. This is betrayal, he said, the word hot and total. After everything our family has done for you. I kept my voice even. What I'm doing, I said, is enforcing the same boundaries any competent landlord would. For 8 years, we have played pretend. We pretended you owned. We pretended I didn't pay. We pretended family was a deed that superseded county records. Pretend has an expiration date. The room lifted several degrees. My father straightened, father again, patriarch again. You are out of line, he said. We'll take legal action, elder abuse, fraud, whatever fits. There are family rights. He said rights the way people say thunder, as if the word itself would make the sky comply. I slid the phone back to me and met his gaze. There is no such thing as family property rights in the way you're invoking them, I said mildly. There are leases. There are deeds. There are statutes. All of which I have read. He opened his folder, then closed it again as if its weight had changed. 30 days, Jessica repeated, tasting the timeline as if it were an insult. The kids, our business, do you have any idea what you're doing to us? It was the wrong question. I did know. I had spreadsheets that could narrate it. Tyler, unable to locate the lever that had always moved me, appealed to the neighborhood. People will hear about this, he warned. You think this won't get out? I let him have the threat. It wasn't even a threat. It was the weather report. Word gets around, I said. It already has. I hadn't needed a private investigator. Families are their own newsrooms. 3 months earlier, my mother had mentioned estate planning to Tyler over a stew that had been ladled with generosity and careful hints. Tyler told Jessica that night after the kids were down. 2 days later, Jessica told her realtor friend over a mezcal flight that she might be moving soon. Big views. The friend had told another friend who knew a contractor who had once redone a closet for a cousin of ours who texted me, of all people, to ask if I'd heard the good news. I had nodded at the text and opened a blank document titled, simply Notices. So here's the process, I said, not to punish but to narrate. My attorney, Marcus Chin, will deliver formal notices this week to all current occupants without leases. If you want to stay, you can. You'll sign market rate leases, first month, last month, security deposit, and you'll pay on time like any other tenant. If you don't want to stay, you'll vacate within 30 days. There will be a walkthrough. We'll document condition. If you damage my property, I will invoice you and, if necessary, pursue it in small claims. This isn't personal. It's property management. Brad cleared his throat as if to ask a question, then decided against it. My mother's voice was tentative. Market rate. She asked, "What is market rate?" I told her. For the estate, $8,500 a month. For the Riverside house, $4,200. For the townhouse, $5,800. The lake cabin, seasonal, negotiable with winterization. Jessica's face went pale in increments, like a dimmer switch sliding down. Tyler did the math in public, his lips moving. My father tried one more angle. We can't afford that, he said. We're retired. Then you will not rent a 6-bedroom estate, I said gently. You will choose housing you can afford. That is what adults do. The meeting deteriorated, as such meetings do, toward volume. Tyler shouted about betrayal. Jessica cried like a siren, rising and falling in loops that begged the room to misremember the facts. My mother begged, my father threatened, then begged, then threatened again. A cycle that might have continued all afternoon had I not stood. Brad, to his credit, stayed very still, the way you do when you realize a bridge you've been driving across for years is actually a plank. I picked up my phone. If you walk out that door, my father boomed, the last tool in his box unsheathed, you are not part of this family anymore. I turned back. Dad, I said, and I didn't layer the word with any of the history it contained. You just tried to give away my home and assign me to a garage. I have not been a part of the version of this family that does that for a long time. I left before the script could find its feet again. Outside, the lawn had the ruthless symmetry of certainty. I sat in my car and stared out through the windshield until my breath stopped fogging the glass. Then I called Marcus. On Tuesday, as promised, Marcus served the notices. He believes in doing things cleanly. He brought a polite police officer to witness delivery because formality deters improvisation. The estate's doorbell camera captured my father opening the door and attempting a smile that broke on the second syllable. At Riverside, Amanda accepted the envelope with a flatness I'd only seen in her on Sundays after church, the expression of someone performing goodness while thinking something else entirely. Jessica refused to open the door until Marcus announced the phrase legal service, at which point she opened it wide, as if to show she had nothing to hide. She did not take the envelope from his hand. He set it gently on the console table anyway. The phone began before the footsteps ended. Angry calls from Tyler that started with "listen to me" and ended with "you'll regret this." Voicemails from my mother, some calm, some broken, all of them choruses of please. My Uncle Frank called and left a minute-long speech about respect that dissolved when he admitted, almost as an afterthought, that he had also gotten a notice and it must be some kind of clerical thing, because your grandmother would never. I forwarded everything to Marcus. I blocked the numbers I needed to block and left open the ones that could learn. Then the public part began. Jessica posted on Facebook at 10:17. Emma. A black square with white text. When your own sister evicts your elderly parents from their home, please pray for us. She geotagged the estate and added a verse about hardened hearts. The comments raced each other to moral high ground. Cousins I hadn't seen since high school wrote paragraphs about blood being thicker than water. Friends from her Pilates studio contributed broken heart emojis and the word toxic, which they use the way a toddler uses glitter. Someone tagged me. I didn't respond. I have learned that you cannot out-argue a chorus that came for catharsis. But truth is patient. 3 days later, Tyler tried to refinance Riverside to play defense, and the loan officer, who had a cheerful phone voice and a spreadsheet, for a soul, informed him that he wasn't on the deed. The mortgage broker, confused by Tyler's confusion, pulled the county record and then called him back to read the name on the title, Clear View Holdings LLC. "Sir," he asked gently, "have you been renting?" That same afternoon, my father tried to open a home equity line on the estate. The bank pulled the deed. Same 3 words. Same silence after. The backlash did what backlash always does when facts arrive. It thinned. Outrage posts went as quiet as living rooms at midnight. Messages shifted tense, from "how could you" to "can we talk?" My mother texted me a sentence with no punctuation. "Your father wants to see you." I let the screen dim. There would be a meeting. There would be a folder. There would be the truth that had waited 8 years to be spoken in a voice that didn't need to raise itself at all. For the first time all week, I slept. Not because I wasn't scared, because I had chosen the least dishonest ending available, a boundary with paperwork. The call came mid-morning from an unknown number that resolved into a bank. The woman on the line had a kind voice engineered for denial. She asked for Tyler. I told her she had the wrong number. "Apologies," she said, and then, almost kindly. We're just trying to help him understand his options. The options were simple. You cannot borrow against a house you do not own. Within an hour, my phone lit up with Tyler's name. I let it go to voicemail. His voice arrived frantic and righteous by turns. "The bank says I'm not on the deed," he said. "They're saying some company, your stupid company, is on it. What did you do? This is fraud, identity theft, something. I'm calling the police." He expected the word police to work on me the way family had stopped working the moment it was used as a crowbar. I sent the voicemail to Marcus and replied with a sentence I had practiced not because I needed it to be perfect, but because I needed it to be brief. "Check the county records. Then check your email." In his inbox sat the notice, the market rate lease, and the calendar link for a walkthrough. That afternoon's echo was my father's attempt at a home equity line of credit on the estate. Banks move faster when the collateral is large. The answer arrived in less time than it takes for a signature to dry. Clear View Holdings LLC. The branch manager, a man who wore his reading glasses on a chain, explained what my father was reading as if he were interpreting a map for a tourist. "You sold this property 8 years ago." The sentence sent my father somewhere I could not follow. Security called from the lobby 20 minutes later. "There's a Mr. Morrison asking for you," the guard said. His voice had picked up the tone of the man in front of him, controlled heat. I told them to let my father up. If a narrative is going to break, better it break where your documents live. He entered my office already mid-accusation. "You forged documents," he said, the consonants tight, "and you stole our house." He didn't sit. He paced the length of the rug I'd chosen for its quiet geometry, and then stopped at my desk the way weather stops at a cliff. He needed me to flinch. I turned the monitor toward him. "Here," I said. Folder after folder opened with a thud of pixels. Deeds. Closing statements. Wire confirmations. Notary logs. Escrow disbursements. County date stamps. It was a parade of nouns. He grabbed the mouse with a hand that tried not to shake and clicked. My mother's initials scrolled by, then his signature, then mine, each one notarized and dated. He opened the Riverside deed, the townhouse deed, the cabin, the rentals. He scrolled through tax receipts that had my LLC name where he'd expected his. He opened the maintenance ledger without meaning to and stumbled over the mundanity: roof replacement, downspout repair, water heater, termite inspection, chimney clean, landscaping for safety sightlines, snow removal, smoke detectors upgraded to code. My father had always loved the idea of stewardship. Here was its checklist. He stopped scrolling somewhere between a furnace invoice and an insurance binder and looked up at me with a face I couldn't remember seeing since I was 12. The expression of a man who has lost the thread and knows it. "You actually bought everything," he said, and the word actually did as much work as any affidavit. He sank into the chair opposite my desk without asking. "We had no idea," he said, not quite to me. It was true, in the sense that willful ignorance is a kind of truth. "You never asked," I said, not to punish him, but because accuracy is a form of mercy. "You assumed." Just like you assumed you could give away my home and assign me to the garage." He rubbed his forehead with his thumb as if memory were a stain. "What do you want, Sophie?" he asked finally. "Money. We don't have," he trailed off. "I know," I said. "You've been living beyond your means for years. You treated appreciation like income, leverage like a plan, and my silence like a guarantee." I clicked to a different tab. "This is not a threat. It's a ledger." I turned the monitor again, and the numbers that had been my private discipline became our shared mirror. Tyler's credit card debt, $85,000 and change across 4 cards, with one teaser rate about to expire into something carnivorous. Jessica's business P&L, negative for 3 consecutive years, cash flow buoyed by loan from family entries that translated to me paying property taxes on time while she invoiced brand dinners. My parents' personal loans, $170,000 total, a hydra of interest-only payments that calmed no one and fed itself. I had not hacked any accounts. I had built a family out of PDFs. He didn't deny. He did what men do when denial collapses. He tried dignity. "So what now?" he asked. "You throw us all out? Laugh while we struggle?" I shook my head. "No," I said. "I enforce boundaries you should have respected without being forced. You, Mom, Tyler, and Jessica, and any relative in a property I own have 30 days to vacate or sign leases at market rate. First month, last month, security deposit. Miss a payment once and eviction proceeds. I will not play property manager and ATM while being cast as selfish for refusing to fund your theater." He looked at the lease for the estate and winced. $8,500, he said. "We can't afford that." "Then you don't rent a 6-bedroom estate," I said gently. "You rent something you can afford." He picked up the pen I had placed beside the documents and put it down again. "This is cruel," he said softly, and the softness was worse than the anger. I took a breath. "What's cruel," I said, "is 8 years of living rent-free in my properties while calling my work computer stuff. What's cruel is deciding that my home is a tool for your networking and my body is a shape that fits above a garage. What's cruel is asking me to let your story use my spine and then faulting me for noticing." He closed his eyes. For a moment, all I heard was the air system moving on schedule. "Give us time," he said. "We'll pay." "You'll try," I said, because accuracy again. "But trying is not a lease. If you sign, you pay. If you can't, you don't sign. You downsize. You live like adults. You stop externalizing costs and internalizing applause." He nodded once, a concession that cost him. He stood, then sat again, then finally stood. At the door, he turned. "You built something, didn't you?" It wasn't quite a question. "I built an empire," I said, because the word was both an achievement and a rebuke I had earned the right to deliver. 12 properties, $3 million in equity, a consulting practice across 5 countries. And I did it while paying the bills you didn't see and absorbing the contempt you didn't hear yourself speaking. The 30 days moved the way months do when all the clocks agree. Inevitably, my parents signed a lease for a smaller 3-bedroom I owned in a less impressive neighborhood. The rent, $1,200 less than the estate, but still a stretch, forced their retirement math into the dignity of arithmetic. Tyler and Amanda did not sign. They moved to a modest rental not owned by me and traded the Range Rover for a used Honda that started with a cough and then, dutifully, ran. Jessica and Brad moved in with his parents, where dinner at 6 came with a chore chart and health insurance sounded like a plan instead of a vibe. Uncle Frank found a studio with a window that looked at an alley and a rent he could pay with one job instead of none. My empty units were empty for a week each. Professional tenants arrived with references I could actually verify and credit scores that read like rain. They signed leases without speeches, set up auto pay, and sent maintenance requests in complete sentences. The buildings relaxed. There is a sound that houses make when they are respected. It is quiet, but once you hear it, you recognize it forever. 2 months in, Tyler texted and asked for 10 minutes. He arrived at my office thinner, or maybe just less padded by certainty. "I'm not here to ask for anything," he said before sitting. Amanda made me promise to start there. He laughed once, not at me, not at himself, but at the shape of the air between us. "I get it now," he said. "The taxes alone on that house, 15 grand a year, at least. I never saw a bill. I never asked. Willful ignorance." He flexed the phrase like a new joint. "I'm sorry," he added, and nothing in his face reached for a loophole. "For assuming. For going along with Dad's plan about your penthouse. For acting like what you built belonged to us the second it was useful." "Apology accepted," I said, "because some bridges deserve repair if the river is honest." "Are you happy?" he asked, surprising me. I considered. "I'm not happy you're struggling," I said. "But I'm at peace. Boundaries don't punish. They prevent." He nodded, and for a moment we were the kids we had been, sitting on a curb deciding whether to keep walking or go home. That night my father called. "Your mother wants to invite you to dinner," he said. At the house we're renting." He caught himself on the pronoun and corrected it, a repair as small as it was significant. "She's not asking for money," he said quickly, hearing the boundary even when I didn't say it. "She just misses you." Something in my chest lifted and set down. "I miss her, too," I said. "But we're not going back to the version of us where my success is dismissed and my property is an open bar." He was quiet. "I know," he said at last. "We're learning." He cleared his throat. "The rent is due next week," he added, as if telling me the weather. "We'll have it on time." "Good," I said. And it was. The next morning, I walked the perimeter of one of my buildings with the property manager I'd hired now that my tenants were strangers in the best way. We checked gutters, stair treads, the way light fell in the hallway at 4 p.m. I signed 2 leases in the afternoon, approved a routine HVAC service, and let my hand rest on a stack of quiet paper that had taken the place of a lifetime of loud assumptions. Vindication didn't feel like triumph. It felt like calibration, the system humming at the frequency it should have had all along. 30 days taught everyone a new language. The words were ordinary: lease, deposit, due date, inspection, but they sounded different in our mouths. Even the calendar felt reprogrammed. First of the month became a metronome, not a rumor. The estate, no, the house on Ashfield Lane, which is what the county calls it, grew quiet in a way that wasn't sad so much as accurate. The piano in the formal room was dusted and closed. The bowl of monogrammed matchbooks by the fireplace dwindled to nothing. My parents signed the lease on the smaller 3-bedroom I owned across town, a 1-story with a stubborn oak and a driveway that sloped honestly toward the street. The rent stretched their math until it clicked. I watched them move through rooms with fewer corners and more truth. On the first Saturday, after they settled, I stopped by with a plant I picked for its indifference. ZZ plants thrive on neglect. My mother met me on the porch wearing the kind of smile you make with practice. Inside, the kitchen smelled like chicken and thyme. My father was wrestling a shelf into a narrower pantry, muttering at screws that had forgotten their original lives. He looked up, surprised and self-conscious all at once. "It's smaller than we thought," he said. Then, this was new, "and we'll make it work." He paused. "Rent will be in on the 1st, he added, as if reading the weather. "Thank you for the lease." The sentence was strange in his mouth, like speaking a second language learned late and taken seriously. Tyler and Amanda texted photos of their new place, a modest 2-bedroom with carpet that wanted to be vacuumed and windows that faced a parking lot instead of a lawn. The kids shared rooms and made treaties about blankets. They sold the Range Rover. The used Honda coughed in the morning and then dutifully ran. Amanda sent me a picture of a spreadsheet she'd made labeled Actual Budget, color-coded blocks standing in for choices and limits. "I hate this," she wrote, "and it feels good." The contradiction wasn't a contradiction. It was honesty, finally expressed in cells. Jessica lasted 2 weeks pouting and 1 week crying before something shifted. Not a conversion, but a concession. She and Brad moved in with his parents, whose house believed in dinner at 6 and questions about 401(k)s. She found a corporate job with benefits that sounded like nouns instead of vibes. She texted a photo of her employee badge with a caption I did not expect. "I forgot how nice it is to know the money arrives when the work is done." Her tone still had angles, but it had fewer mirrors. My phone grew quieter. The blocked numbers remained blocked. The open lines filled with facts, a question about renter's insurance, a request for a copy of the signed lease to submit to a school, a friendly update from my property manager that the downstairs hallway light sensor had been replaced, and the stairwell felt safer already. In the empty spaces where worry had lived, administration took up residence. It turns out that a system functioning at the right frequency is not loud. It hums. The buildings themselves responded. At the downtown townhouse, the new tenants, a pair of ICU nurses who worked opposite shifts, sent maintenance requests in full sentences, attached photos with good lighting, and left a thank you note after the plumber fixed a valve no one else had ever quite fixed. At Riverside, the lawns grew unpretentious. A tricycle appeared on the sidewalk, then disappeared indoors at dusk as if by choreography. The lake cabin's winterization happened on a schedule instead of a whim. The contractor texted me a photo of the drained lines with the same pride he used for a kitchen remodel. There is a sound houses make when they are respected. It is a soft settling, the architectural version of a deep breath. I walked my buildings with the property manager I'd hired, Vanessa, a woman with boots for mud and contracts for everything, and we touched railings, counted smoke detectors, and paused at thresholds not to admire trim, but to feel whether the place was steady. "These like being treated like they matter," she said, patting the banister. "People are the same." On a rainy Tuesday, I visited my parents to drop off an addendum I'd drafted to clarify a minor clause about trash bins and pickup times. My mother was sorting a box of old papers, greeting cards, school programs, the sediment of sentiment that accumulates in corners. "Do you want any of this?" she asked, holding up a program from a fourth-grade recital where I had played a song called Moonlight Walk, with more enthusiasm than rhythm. I laughed and shook my head. She sighed, a sound that was part nostalgia, part fatigue, and set the box aside. "There's another bin in the garage," she said. "From Grandma's things." I keep meaning to go through it. I offered to help. It was a small garage, honest about its size. We pulled the plastic tub to the middle of the floor and opened it. Inside, a stack of folders, the old kind, manila and earnest, sat on top of photo albums that had surrendered the fight against time. We sorted quietly. A birth certificate, a recipe card in a looping hand that made sugar look like music, a church bulletin. At the bottom of one folder, between a warranty for a vacuum and a postcard from Niagara, I found an envelope addressed to no one. Inside, a note in my grandmother's handwriting, dated the year before she died. It wasn't a secret clause or a notarized wish. It was a paragraph, a plain voice inked in blue. "I have learned," it read, "that the grandchild who protects what others merely inherit will often be called selfish by the ones who mistake comfort for love. If you are that grandchild, do not let their names for you become your names for yourself. Keep the roof sound. Pay the boring bills. Let the children eat on the floor sometimes. And when they accuse you of meanness, look them in the eye and ask if they would like to try paying the taxes for a year. Love is not free rent. Love is respect with a schedule." I did not need the note to justify anything. The leases had already done that. But holding those words, astonishing in their clarity, strangely like my own voice, I felt something change pitch inside me. Not vindication. Calibration. Confirmation that boundaries weren't invented by me as an argument. They were discovered by me as a tool. My mother read over my shoulder, and for a moment her hand found my arm, not to steer me, but to anchor herself. "She wrote that?" she whispered. I nodded. My father, who had come out to fetch a screwdriver and stayed for the weather, took the paper and read it twice. When he handed it back, the corners of his mouth had moved, not upward into a smile, but outward into a truer line. "Your grandmother was practical," he said softly. "We called it stern." He stopped and corrected himself. "I called it stern." That correction, present tense to past, judgment to description, was a small hinge. I tucked the note into a sleeve in my bag, not as evidence to deploy, but as a map I recognized. Later that week, I scanned it and stored it with the deeds, because all important things live in duplicate. Tyler visited again. He brought coffee and humility. "Amanda says to tell you thank you," he said. "She says you did the right thing." He reported on their budget like it was a new pet, temperamental at first, then surprisingly affectionate once fed properly. "We plan dinners now," he said, half amused. "We plan birthdays. We plan saying no to things that cost more than they're worth." He paused. "Do you think that's what adults are?" I told him that adulthood is less a noun and more a verb. Pay, plan, learn, repeat. Jessica's text arrived early on a Thursday. First paycheck hit. I cried in a bathroom stall and then bought a bag of clementines instead of champagne. Progress? I sent a thumbs up and, after a moment, yes. She didn't reply with sarcasm. She replied, "Okay." The properties performed like instruments tuned on the same day. 2 vacancies turned into leases in under a week. Vanessa's maintenance tracker moved in neat diagonals. My consulting work, my so-called computer stuff, calmed back into its ordinary whirl of deadlines and deliverables. Clients in Berlin and Austin and Singapore called to argue about scope and then paid, on time, because we had set terms and enforced them. I slept in full nights instead of fractions. When I woke in the dark, I no longer played the family's balance sheet on the ceiling. I thought about caulking, gutters, the delicate sanity of a hallway that is lit exactly when it should be. One evening, I stood at the windows of my penthouse, still mine, and watched the city do what cities do, turn on. Lights bloomed floor by floor. A helicopter stitched the river to a roof with a sound like a zipper. In the glass, my reflection found my face. It didn't look triumphant. It looked like someone finally holding the correct keys. The phone buzzed. It was my father. "Your mother made pot roast," he said, "the way you announce a small miracle. We'd like to have you over. Not to discuss anything. To eat." He paused. "It would be at our place." He got the pronoun right again. The pause settled into a shape that wasn't pressure. "Maybe next month," I said. "After the first." He understood the joke and the vow. "After the first," he agreed. People talk about closure as if doors slam. What I felt was more like doors finding their frames, hinges oiled, latches aligned. Boundaries had not ended my family. They had given us edges to push against without falling through. Love, it turned out, could live in a lease. Respect, it turned out, could arrive with rent on time. On my way to bed, I slid my grandmother's note into the front pocket of the file where I keep the deeds. Paper likes company, and some sentences deserve to rest beside the things they protect. 6 months later, the city kept its promises the way cities do, by humming. From my penthouse windows at dusk, the skyline lit up like a graph trending, and somewhere between the river's slow braid and the cross-stitch of headlights, I felt the thing I had been working toward without naming. Steadiness. 14 properties now, 2 added with income from the others. Vanessa's weekly reports came in tidy packets, leases current, work orders closed, one tenant pregnant, and asking about air conditioning in August. Approval granted with a note and a smile. The buildings answered like instruments tuned on the same day. No drama, just tone. My parents' rent arrived on the first 3 months in a row, then the fourth, then the fifth, punctual as weather. The little one's story had begun to feel like a confession, rewritten as a home, pared back, livable, honest. My mother hung 3 family photos in the hallway and left the rest in a box she no longer called Someday. My father learned the trash schedule by heart and taught it to the neighbor on the left who worked nights. Once, when I dropped off a repaired lamp and a bag of clementines, I watched him adjust the shade with the quiet satisfaction of someone choosing what his hands do next. The pantry fits now, he told me, a rambling way to say, we fit now. He still stumbled when he said lease, but the stumble had changed temperature. It wasn't resistance anymore. It was respect. Tyler and Amanda made budgeting a family sport. The kids used sticker charts and jars. Amanda used formulas and a willingness to say no without apologizing for loving them. Tyler biked to work 3 days a week and returned home grinning like a boy who'd discovered his own legs. He sent me a photo after dinner one Tuesday, an unremarkable table, plates washed, a board game mid-play. We're never going back, he wrote underneath. There was no sermon in it, just a decision. Jessica sent fewer pronouncements and more facts. She hated her alarm clock. She loved health insurance. She set calendar blocks named work and rest and started arriving on time to both. The first time she texted me a photo of a pay stub, she added no caption at all. A month later, she sent a screenshot of her 401k contribution with a single word, adulting. It was a joke that didn't hide inside sarcasm. That mattered. The internet found a new scandal. The Facebook post dissolved under the tide like a sand castle that shouldn't have been built so close to the waterline. The cousins stopped tagging me. The Pilates friends met a newer, shinier villain. The chorus went elsewhere for catharsis. I slept better, not because the world had become kinder, but because I had stopped volunteering to be misunderstood in public. You can't out-argue a chorus, I'd told myself, but you can outlast one. It turns out outlasting just means living. The work, the computer stuff, kept its rhythm. Igatuna. In Berlin, a client thanked me for insisting on permission gates and the boring discipline of logs. A near miss had proven the architecture and my insistence in one go. In Austin, a founder who'd once called boundaries bad vibes emailed to say, "We're profitable, and I hate how much I love this boring plan." In Singapore, a team I'd never meet in person fixed a bug I found with a note that read, "We left the code cleaner than we found it. Like a campsite." I saved that email next to my grandmother's note. People who tidy the world make it easier to breathe. On a Sunday that smelled like rain, I drove to my parents' place with a casserole because some rituals are not manipulations. They're just food. We ate at their small table, knees finding their places, conversation circling the ordinary, a neighbor's dog, the too early heat, the way the light in the living room made late afternoons feel borrowed. My mother asked about work and actually listened to the answer. My father talked about a book he'd started and halfway through his description, realized he'd never asked what I was reading. He asked. I told him. We were not at a summit. We were at a foothold. It felt like the right landscape for us. After dinner, we stood in the driveway because driveways are where families practice their truths. Feet pointed toward cars, faces turned toward each other. The possibility of leaving, keeping everyone honest. We're proud of you, my father said, not squeezing the words into a shape that made them cost me something. Not because of the portfolio, he added, finding the correct noun one beat late, but because you told the truth and stayed. I nodded and said thank you, because sometimes the bravest thing you can do with a compliment is not dilute it. On my way home, the sky bruised and then forgave itself. I thought about that starred folder on my phone, deeds, taxes, ledgers, and the quiet power of having your record straight. I thought about the other paper, the soft one written in blue ink, my grandmother's voice, talking me through a future she didn't live to see. I have learned that the grandchild who protects what others merely inherit will often be called selfish. The line no longer felt like armor. It felt like a map. Love is not free rent. Love is respect with a schedule. I whispered the sentence into the car and felt ridiculous, and then not at all. There's a footnote I haven't told you because it arrived quietly and didn't ask for applause. A month after my parents' third on-time payment, I ran the numbers and lowered their rent by $200 a month. Not as a bribe, not as a regression, but as a recognition that they were keeping their side of the roof up now. I sent the addendum with a note for timely payments and no late-night phone calls about imaginary emergencies. My father replied with a thumbs-up emoji he must have practiced sending. My mother followed with, "Thank you for treating us like tenants and family." It was, impossibly, both. If this were a documentary with a narrator you never see, this is where the camera would pan, over the estate that is now somebody else's perfectly ordinary house, over the riverside lawn that is no one's performance anymore, over the townhouse where the nurses swap shifts and leave notes on the fridge in thick markers, over the lake cabin, shuttered right, ready to exhale spring when spring comes. It would linger, I think, on my front door, a key entering, turning, the sound of an ordinary lock doing its unglamorous, essential job. What did I learn? That boundaries are not walls, they're frames. They hold the picture in place so you can actually see it. That the greater good is only moral if consent is part of the math. That family can be a shelter or a lever, and you are allowed to refuse to be pried open. That love, measured against time instead of drama, looks like a rent payment arriving on the first and a dinner that contains only dinner. If you've stayed with me this long, through the quiet facts and the loud feelings, thank you. I hope you and your family find health, steadiness, and the kind of happiness that does not demand a stage. I hope the roofs over your heads are sound, the boring bills are paid, and the words you use to describe each other are the kind that make rooms larger, not smaller. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the difference between generosity and surrender, if you'd like more drama x documentary x vindication, stories where truth is documented, justice is earned, and endings feel deserved, I'd be grateful if you subscribed. It helps these stories find the people who need them, and it reminds the algorithm that quiet facts matter. I set my phone on the counter, pour a glass of water, and open my laptop. Somewhere out there, in a hallway I will never walk, a motion sensor turns on exactly when someone needs it. Somewhere else, a tenant pays rent without thinking much about it. In a small kitchen across town, my mother labels a spice jar because labels help. My father folds a receipt and puts it in the correct envelope. Tyler texts a photo of a board game no one flips. Jessica buys clementines again and tells herself that celebration is a thing you can do with citrus and a pay stub. And me, I lock my own door, not against anyone, but for the pleasure of knowing it opens to the right keys.